Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Afeefa Farooq Fazli. I really apologize to you all for not being here in person because I'm probably writing an exam right now. Uh, I am working as a researcher on this project, and my research focuses on the role of arts in conflicted areas. For this research, I'm using a model which is called the basic PH model of coping and resiliency, which was developed by Muli Lahad, Miri Shachman, and Ora Airlon. This is used as an effective resiliency assessment, intervention, and recovery model. So if you look at the name, that is the basic PH, it basically, the name comes from its 6 channels, or the language for dealing with trauma and building resilience. B stands for belief and values, A stands for affect, S stands for social, I stands for imagination, C stands for cognitive, and PH stands for physiological. For this research, what we've basically done is that the research basically begins with an introduction of the participant by the researcher, that is me, and by the participant themselves. So this we've taken 7 participants and we have analyzed their work that they've done over the period of 10 months. So these are basically detailed case studies. And while we go through the research, I've given an example for me to make it easier for you to understand how the research basically works. So every step is basically an analysis. It's not that one step leads to another, or it's not like it has a conclusion at the end. Every step, it's like a detailed analysis of what the work has done using different methods. So there are basically 6 stories that we've done per individual. So I'll be giving an example. I've taken a story by one of the participants. So this is a story that I have taken to understand how the research works. So this is a story and it's called Journey to Home. So this is a story about a butterfly who is on a journey to look for her home, and it's about how she moves around and asks different creatures about where she can find flowers. So she is basically in a grassland which is very dry, and she is basically looking for flowers, and there are no flowers there. And then as she moves on, she sees some dried flowers, but then she realizes, oh, they're dry. And then she keeps going and she sees tulips, white tulips. Okay, and then she goes on and then she realizes that white tulips is not something that she likes. She would really like her to get herself some roses. And then she's like, and then she sees a parrot, and then she asks the parrot where she can find some flowers. The parrot instructs her to go straight, and then the butterfly thanks him, and then she sees a bear, and then a pigeon, and then at the end she sees a deer who tells us where she can find the flowers, and then she finally does. The rule of the 6-part story method is used for analysis in the basic PH grouping model. So I have divided the story according to that. So the main character of the story is the butterfly. The task is to get back to home, and then the help is the parrot and the deer, and the obstacle is the pigeon, and then the coping with the obstacle, how she copes with the obstacle is that she just keeps her search going on for the home, and then she finally does get back home. So here what we do is, and then we assess the story according to the basic PH model. Here what happens is that every single word that has been used in the story, except for a few conjunctions like I am and all that, every single word in the story is rated based on the basic PH value. So here we can see like the butterfly is would be rated as social, or we can see journey, it's something that is physiological. So every single word here is divided based on the basic PH model. And then for the next step, what we do is we count how many times a certain word has occurred. So here in the story, belief has not been used as all. And then we see affect. Affect has been used 12 times, and then social has been used 6 times, and similarly cognitive 15, physiological 12. The top 3, the alphabets, like the basic PH, the ones that are used the most, the top three form the apparent language. So in this story, we see that the most prominent used coping mechanisms are C, PH, and A, that is cognition, physiological, and the affect. They're used more. So higher score in C basically implies that the person has a higher IQ and has a fewer cognitive complaints. So this can be reflected in the child's performance at school, where she has been seen has been the topper of the class. A score of 12 in PH translates to behavioral coping and active coping. A combination of PH and C implies that the person is practical and rational. It also implies that the person can plan and perform well. A combination of C and A might imply that the person is emotional, but they're also practical about it. A higher score in A represents an emotional approach to things and can also suggest a higher score in C, and can also suggest that a higher score in C might imply that the person thinks that with their mind rather than their heart. Okay, so the forgotten language is the coping mechanism that is used the least. In this case, it is belief, imagination, and social. So this can imply that the person lacks belief in themselves. It can also convey that the person gives up easily and that the person fails to draw strength from adversity. They are also not very social, and an S minus proves that they may see others as obstacles. So they're very antisocial and they kind of lack social support. So this was a step that was not really mentioned in the basic PH model, but this is something that I felt would be really useful in giving the study a quantitative value kind of. So what I have done is I've counted the number of words that have been analyzed under basic PH, and then the number of words are divided by the total number of words, which basically gives us a presentation of what the total number of words is. So you can visually see that C as a coping mechanism is used the most. So this basically gives you a visual representation, and this is the step that is used further in the end of the research, at the end of the case study, to make further conclusions about the work. We basically then look at the theme, like what is happening, what really is happening in the story. The next step, so the basic idea, for the next step of the research, we look at the conflict. So this level basically probes into the unconscious of the individual. This level uses a psycholinguistic approach while adapting a psychodynamic point of view. So Fenichel maintains that the neurotic conflict by definition is one between the tendency striving for discharge and another tendency that tries to prevent this discharge. So the symptoms are actions that are taken against the anxieties that underlie behaviors and conflicts. In literary forms, actions are represented by verbs and adverbs. We hence look for all the verbs and adverbs in the story. They are then jotted down and contrasted with each other with the opposite verbs or adverbs, thus uncovering the opposite intention or conflict. The list of opposites reveals the possible conflict. So this was yet another thing that was not actually a part of the basic PH model, but if we were actually looking at the clusters, we look at the 16 personality factors that were given by Raymond Cattell. So it's based on the trait approach of personality. So there are 16 personality factors that form the psychological clusters that are group-dependent versus self-sufficient, relaxed versus tense, forthright versus shrewd, self-assured versus apprehensive, serious versus happy-go-lucky, submissive versus dominant, affected by feelings versus emotionally stable, trusting versus suspicious. Then comes reserved versus outgoing, less intelligent versus more intelligent, conservative versus experimenting, practical versus imaginative, uncontrolled versus controlled, tough-minded versus sensitive, timid versus venturesome, and expedient versus conscientious. So we basically then, like we said, we take the verbs, adverbs, and write the opposite. So if we talk about going, the opposite is coming. So it's a cluster. It would come under self-assured versus apprehensive. So this is something that is very subjective, and I thought that these are the clusters that are a part of this. So like we can see and cannot see. So for me, it felt under uncontrolled versus controlled, practical versus imaginative, less intelligent versus more intelligent, practical versus imaginative, trusting versus suspicious. So every single adverb is taken out of the story, and a huge table comes out as a form of that. And then we look at individual scores of each conflict, where every single conflict is basically numbered, like how many times the given conflict has occurred. So for the next step, we take the summary of this conflict as in what the top conflict, what is the most prominent conflict that is a part that is happening right now while the person is, writing the story, while the person was doing their story. So the next one is basically the symbols, and this has been taken from Sir Lots. So every single word that is a part of the story is basically searched for in the dictionary, and it's the meanings are looked for and what they mean. And then supposedly butterfly, so it is the emblem of soul, of unconscious attraction towards the light. What really happens then is that every single symbol that we can find in the dictionary, so then using these symbols, the meaning of these symbols is then inserted into the story to make a complete sense, to make to understand what the story really is about based on that dictionary. So after we're done with all this, what we really look at is then for the 6 different, then in order to conclude the work, at the end of every individual's 6 stories, there is a different section where every single thing is concluded. So it has a summary of how different coping mechanisms, how the use of different coping mechanisms has happened over the period of time. For example, in this one, we can see how the use of affect as a coping mechanism has changed, and this basically gives us a visual representation, and we can actually convert this into numbers. Like, okay, so this is how the graph works. The use of affect as a coping mechanism has increased, and then it has taken a slight dip at the end, but it is something that is prominently used. And there are other conclusions at the end of the story, but due to the short a period of time that I had, I could just summarize my research this much. I would love to hear everyone's comments and everyone's feedback about my research, and since I'm not here right now, I would love to take questions and obviously the feedback for this research. And for this, you can email me at afeefafazli@gmail.com, AFEEFAFAZLI@gmail.com. Thank you so much for your time.